Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Operations, and I want to welcome one of our new members, Candle Consulting Group, and co-owners Andrew Cox and Kyle Zilkowski. Thanks for joining. All right, Brian, let's start off with some news that kind of came to light the middle of last week, and it's related to a proposal from a few months ago called Invest in My Kids, and we were concerned about it. It's been in the news recently, but let's talk about what Invest in My Kids is.
Yeah, just as a reminder, this is a proposal for a graduated income tax in Michigan. It would modify the Constitution. It collects signatures to put a question before the voters to modify the Constitution to allow a graduated income tax. It starts out with something explicit. They say, well, joint filers with over $1 million in adjusted gross income um, and single filers with 500,000 in income would be subject to a 5% higher graduated income tax. So instead of 4.25%, it'd be 9.25%. And it makes no distinction for the small businesses who file as pass-through entities with their business income on their personal returns. And so the vast, and I mean vast majority of the people that would be affected by this are actually small businesses where their business income runs through their personal tax return. And um, and so we're really concerned about it. So that's the proposal. It would modify the Constitution. It has explicit amounts in it, but the way that they do the modification is it would also remove or make moot the prohibition against graduated income taxes in the Constitution that we have today. And it would leave it just up to the legislature in the future to change those levels. So you might hear those levels and say, oh, that doesn't probably wouldn't apply to me. Even many businesses, their income doesn't necessarily hit that type of a level, but it takes the constitutional protection away. They abrogate it, is what it's called. It's very tricky how they have it worded in there in the proposal, and so then the legislature could just lower those limits in the future, and given the just the appetite for state government spending. Um, you can assume that there would be quite a lot of pressure from year to year to look at those rates and include more, particularly small businesses, in that higher rate of 9.25%.
The Tax Foundation released a report last week on the impact that this proposal would have. What did that study say?
Yeah, and what I really loved about the Tax Foundation report and the fact that it was the Tax Foundation that did it is that this is really the most credible source on tax policy anywhere in the country. This is the gold standard for comparing, reviewing, and articulating the impacts of different types of tax policy across the country. And so in this case, because this is mostly a tax on small businesses, the um, the impact is felt in a way that is very direct to the things that small businesses do, including providing jobs. And so this proposal would cost our state about 43,000 jobs. It would result in a 1% drop in wages overall and about a $10 billion hit to the private sector economy. And this comes true in a lot of different ways. Where and how people incorporate where they live and recognize their income, the where they grow and invest, and how much money is left over to pay employees. All of those things figure into the impacts on here. So it's not I think the real takeaway from this is that it's not a static world that we live in. The government can't just say to small business owners, "Hey, we're going to more than double your taxes," and have that not result in other things changing, including where they grow or if they decide to grow and add people, how much they have available to pay their employees, and if they over the long term decide to invest elsewhere, move their residences elsewhere, and essentially recognize their income elsewhere. Other no income tax states at that point become quite attractive. Michigan right now has a flat tax rate of 4.25%. And while that's not as good as some other states, it's also not as bad as other states. You know, it's kind of right in the middle. And so it's not the type of incentive that doubling it would literally cause. Just to give an idea of where we would stand compared to others, it would make us, in terms of the top tax rates, top 10 highest in the country. So instead of like our neighbors, Ohio and Indiana, that are 2.75 and 2.95% respectively. So both of them are below our current rate of 4.25%. But it would put us up closer to states like California, 13.3, New York, 10.9, Minnesota, 9.85. Because you have to remember that it's not just state, but state and local. If you're in a city, then your tax rate, your combined tax rate of state and local income taxes. Certain cities have income taxes as well. That can be that would push it well over 11% for many taxpayers in the state. And that's on top of the federal income tax. So it is a pretty big deal here. It's something that we have been quite concerned about. And we are very pleased to see the Tax Foundation publish a report so that people have information and some about the tangible impacts that this proposal would have on our economy.
So, Brian, where do things stand with the proposal overall?
They have to collect a lot of signatures, literally hundreds of thousands of signatures, and they need to have a cushion because not all those signatures on the petitions will be valid. And it's hard to tell because they haven't been publishing totals and how many signatures that they're getting. But it's been a really cold and harsh winter. And so it's difficult to collect signatures in those types of circumstances. If I'm counting right and I'm correct about when I think they went out in the field and started collecting signatures, it really is toward the end of November, beginning of March when their deadline is. You have a 6-month window to collect. And so it's hard to say exactly where the proposal is and if they're getting close, but it doesn't have the look to me of a campaign that has been wildly successful in collecting signatures. That usually when there's one of those where they're going to clearly pass the threshold, you see people out collecting signatures all the time. I've seen less of it this year, and there aren't as many other proposals to kind of piggyback on where they have the same volunteer collecting for multiple proposals. So I'd say in the next 6 to 8 weeks, we probably should have a much better idea on whether or not the the proposal itself is going to be able to make it on the ballot. If it does collect, if they do collect the signatures and it goes through the verification process, then we will be highly, highly engaged in educating folks about how it might be billed as like soak the rich type of a proposal. The real mechanics behind the scenes on this thing are that most of the impacted entities are in fact small business owners.
And I was just grabbing a link on our website. It's a statement that we issued last week, a joint statement we issued with a link to the proposal. So I'll drop that here in the chat and on Facebook shortly.
Definitely worth checking out. They do great work at the Tax Foundation. It's one that it's a nonpartisan organization, and what I love is that they share their methodology. There's no mystery behind the numbers that they publish. They do share how they rank things, how they calculate things, so it's very transparent.
All right, Brian, last week, the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance held their annual conference. You were part of it on Friday, but there were some other special guests in attendance too, including 6 of the major gubernatorial candidates. How did they do?
Yeah, this was actually a very impressive showing by the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance. I love this collection of local chambers that get together and work together across the Upper Peninsula, the UP, and then Northern Lower Peninsula. And all of these organizations band together. And one of the things they do is this annual conference, and they focus on a lot of things, but especially policy. And they invited in gubernatorial candidates. They had 6 of them there. This is the first time that those 6 candidates have appeared on the same stage, but it was not at the same time. It wasn't a debate. They had 15-minute segments for each of these candidates, and so each one took the same or very similar questions from the same reporter in front of the audience, kind of a chat about different issues, and a wide type of array of responses and discussions that happened between these candidates, the things that they were going to make a priority. They also then polled the audience to see who the audience felt most connected to or who was most engaged on Northern Michigan issues, and all the candidates actually did pretty well on that. So in other words, they presented pretty well. The top one though was actually Mike Duggan. Got the highest score from the attendees, which was maybe a little bit of a surprise in that, mayor from a major metropolitan area, very different than Northern Michigan, but he was able to demonstrate or communicate that a connection, an understanding of local issues that when they did the kind of real-time poll that was like immediately up, it wasn't who would you vote for, it was more who's engaged and understands Northern Michigan issues. But again, all of the candidates did pretty well on that when they put it up on the screen. So very, very impressive showing. I was very pleased that the organizations were able to not just draw a crowd and draw interest from people who seek to be governor, but also legislators and other policymakers from around the state. But think about what last Friday was like. I mean, they're a hardy bunch up there. They don't let weather get in the way. So it wasn't, I can't say that shouldn't be too surprising, but to be able to draw that many people from that many corners of the state at a time when travel was quite challenging, all the more impressive.
And you had some time on stage as well. What was your message?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to discuss with a couple of legislators and also somebody from MEDC as part of a panel, the future of economic development and what is important in terms of economic growth in the future. And the message that I brought, I think maybe there was some thought that maybe we'd be talking more about incentives, but my first message was to lay off on the new rules. The best thing that you can do, or the most like fundamentally universally helpful thing that you could do, is to stop adding new rules and regulations and mandates on top of small businesses. Trying to communicate the notion that while any individual rule or regulation might not seem like enough, it's on top of and it has a cumulative effect of all the others that came before. It's a very, very difficult situation. And then beyond that, though, and talking about economic development, if there are specific economic development tools that are put in place, one thing that we at SBAM really do insist on is that they be built in ways that are just as accessible to small businesses as big businesses. In other words, you shouldn't have to be in a position where you create hundreds of or thousands of jobs at the same time in one location and one company in order to qualify for economic development support. If the state, and again, that's if, state could do other fundamental things that would be helpful and maybe more helpful, but if the state is going to do direct economic development support, it should start with job number one and recognize the fact that thousands of jobs from hundreds of different businesses spread all over the state is better than thousands of jobs from one company in one part of the state. And so it's a question really of resilience here. And so I wanted to really deliver the message that that if the state goes down this road, it needs to be done in a different way than it has in recent years. Ideally, though, it would go back to the more economic gardening type of a philosophy, though, where it really is creating an environment of success for everybody, no matter what business they're in or what size business they are, in order to maximize the potential of the population at large, not just the ones that kind of know their way through programs. The other thing was to focus on costs with cost drivers, and I highlighted healthcare because health insurance costs have really gotten to a point where they are stifling the ability of small businesses to grow, to add people. It's a bigger factor than it has ever been, and it is holding them back. So those are some of the policy insights, some of the priorities that I shared that come directly from our members, and hopefully the there were both policymakers and local chambers and businesses and stakeholders, community stakeholders from all different communities across the north that were there. Um, Hopefully it was impactful, but overall, I was very, very impressed. I just think that organization is doing exactly the right things, which is not to be parochial about some particular town or some particular area, but instead recognizing that that whole part of the state has a lot in common. To the extent that they can speak with one voice, they're going to be more effective.
All right, well, sounds like a powerful message and a great event all around. Let's move into some economic news. University of Michigan published some updates on consumer sentiment and inflation expectations that surprised you.
Yeah, I was a little surprised because they were both trending upward a bit. Now, don't get me wrong, they're still at historically lower levels, but since the pandemic, the both the inflation expectations and consumer sentiment have just been very, very low, and 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 they've been held down low for quite some time. The But both of them actually went up a little bit, and it's not that, I mean, they always bounce up and down a little bit, but I had been picking up on this on the street, in terms of economics, maybe on balance a little more negative sentiment, and so to see the surveys come back with rising um, sentiment, again, modestly rising, still historically low on an absolute basis, but relatively speaking. And then inflation expectations also tempering. That good signs, just kind of frankly out of nowhere. And so maybe something to kind of point to in terms of reason to be optimistic, although we have been picking up from our own interactions with our members. And this is anecdotal, but um, we have a lot of members and we talk to a lot of businesses in a lot of different places. And when we hear on balance kind of negative sentiment, it really does mean something. So what the reason it surprised me is that it wasn't in the same as kind of the vibe, if you will, that we have been picking up as of late. But overall, good news.
All right, the personal consumption index inflation was also published last week for November. What do you think?
Yeah, this was I I don't always bring this up every month, but because we talk about inflation in terms of the consumer price index, but the personal consumption index is actually looked at more closely and weighted more heavily by the Federal Reserve that controls monetary policies like interest rates. And this one takes into consideration substitutions that people make. So when costs go up, people don't behave exactly the same. They might substitute different things. They might buy this thing instead of that thing because the price went up, or they might stop buying something and totally do something different with the money. There's a substitution impact that happens when prices rise. And so this goes to actual cost experiences of consumers, not a fixed basket of goods, which is the consumer price index. And this came in exactly as expected at 2.8%. So, and that's what it was last month too. So month by month, it stayed the same. The expectations, the projected rate was the same. It was kind of steady as she goes. And this is where things have been stubbornly stuck for so long, is this area where it's not high, but it's not at the target rate of 2%. And I think it's the primary reason why um, the Federal Reserve has been so slow to bring interest rates down any faster than they have. So I don't think this changes really anything because it does meet expectations. There was a quarter point drop here recently, and that's probably going to be it for a little while. But I think there's a really strong case and a high likelihood that there'll be further drops in the future. But this the PCE inflation is steady as she goes.
All right, let's go to our Road to 2026 segment. There was actually a pretty big announcement today that came somewhat of a surprise.
Yeah, the big surprise was this morning, Perry Johnson, a businessman from Southeast Michigan, announced running for governor. And he has run before in 2022. You might recall, though, that there was a company that does signature collection for ballot access that they had some folks that were filling in and getting paid to do fake signatures that caught up a bunch of candidates that unwittingly hired this company, and that company really ripped him off. And so his campaign before fell apart because of that. It didn't make the ballot, in other words, before. That was 4 years ago, and so he has thrown his hat in the race to do it yet again. So it's a little bit later than all the other candidates because it's pretty crowded, but nonetheless, got made it official today.
All right, so you say he's a businessman from Southeast Michigan. We do recognize that name from 4 years ago, but tell us a little bit more about who he is.
He's a quality control expert, and he has companies that essentially do certification of quality processes. So you implement different processes and get certified that you have implemented those processes to control and measure quality. And in a state like Michigan, that's of course a good place to be in that type of business because of manufacturing relies on these types of standards and processes and certifications. So that business that started here went global because manufacturing is everywhere. So a very sophisticated and large business that has that has long since been international in its reach and activities, and has obviously provided the wherewithal to get in the race late, but to make quite an impact.
All right, and this is a crowded field already, especially on the Republican side. What are his chances overall?
Yeah, and I don't, it's hard to say straight away what the chances are. I will say that right out of the blocks, he made clear that he's going to spend $9 million in the next 60 days raising his name ID. So $9 million in 60 days is a lot, especially when you consider that none of the other candidates, you're right, it's a crowded field. You got John James, Mike Cox, Eric Nesbitt, Tom Leonard, that are in this race on the Republican side. And the but none of them are spending yet. They don't have commercials out, and I mean they're doing some digital activities or travel in the state. They've done forums even with SBAM, as we've had most of the candidates in for forums to talk with our members, but they haven't launched a campaign. And so right out of the blocks, I think in order to make sure that people understood that he should be taken seriously, there's a commitment to put his own dollars, his own resources in 9 million over the next 2 months. That will make a big impact. It will raise his name ID. Now, can he take a bite out in the polls and show kind of forward momentum in terms of support during that time? That's the open question. Depends on the message, depends on how well it resonates. But I do think with that type of resource behind him and the experience of 2022, I think you can believe that a problem with signature collection will not happen this time uh, because of that experience. So ballot access probably will not be a hindrance for this candidate, and budget won't be a hindrance. So the question is, what's the message? Does it resonate? If it does, I think you really do have to take them serious.
All right, and speaking of Road to 2026, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody we have two candidate conversations on the calendar. Sheriff Chris Swanson in conjunction with an O to O this Wednesday in Grand Rapids. And then we are going to host Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson next week, Wednesday, February 4th in Detroit. We would love to have you participate in these. It's a great opportunity to really learn more about these candidates in I'd say a pretty intimate setting. You can even ask questions. So
Yeah, this is a really good opportunity. I would encourage you to take advantage of it, even if you already have a different candidate that you like. We've had so many of the candidates already in for these conversations, and I can tell you that it's a conversation. So it starts out, we host these jointly with the Michigan Black Business Alliance. And so Charity Dean, who's the CEO of that organization, and I trade some questions back and forth with the candidate, and then we open it up to the audience. And we usually get through all of the audience questions. So this is your opportunity to talk to candidates in person and to make an impression, to start a relationship. It's really a great opportunity. They want to hear from small business owners, so please make your voice heard.
All right, that is our show for today. We hope you have a great week, and we will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.